Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the newest episode of the In Production podcast. Today, we have a new guest with us, Mark. Please tell us more about yourself and why should people listen?
My name is Mark Rohde. I'm the Chief Business Integration Officer at Andis Company. I've been working in IT for 20 plus years, and I think we have a lot to talk about in terms of how AI and business converge.
That's great. Well, I'm going to start with the most obvious thing, Chief Business Integration Officer. That's a bit of an unusual title because you own IT, process automation, customer support, inside sales, transportation, logistics under, I could say, very big roof. Was the theory behind collapsing all these responsibilities into a single function? How does that change the way that you are looking at the AI transformation that the company is undergoing, about the AI deployments? I'm curious about your unique take.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. It's an odd title and it's an odd role. I started at Andis as the director of information technology and led that role for many years before expanding. And really, when we look at kind of how the role evolved, I first gained responsibility for the customer enablement area, which includes customer support, inside sales, and account support. And a big part of the rationale behind that is very process oriented. If you look at a background of IT, you have ITIL processes that are very support oriented, and those fit very well into servicing your customers. And then expanding kind of beyond those roles into transportation and logistics. A lot of that again is very process oriented, and it
Mm-hmm.
fits. The way I describe the non-IT portion of my role is I have ultimate ownership of an order from the time it enters our business to the time it gets delivered to a customer. And so keeping that customer service through the entire life cycle of an order does end up making a lot more sense. And then as it relates to AI deployment, um, having the responsibility to make those areas efficient and
Mm-hmm.
customer focused really allows me to kind of own the process from inception to delivery of AI within those areas. And of course, with my IT background, I then ended up having responsibility for AI deployment throughout the entire organization.
Very interesting. Like, I think the good word for to describe all of this is integral because you have an unified view of how the whole organization operates. And it's very nice that you found that the process is the main common denominator in everything. So like the process is the main thing. So it doesn't really matter if the process is in operational or the process is in the customer success, is still the process and it follows the same structure. I see a big merit and I'm wondering why a lot of organizations are not doing that, why everybody is like factioning different processes within different industries. But I guess that's another question. I mean, for the person like you have seen how the organization grows from the moment when you arrived at Andis like 13 years ago to the moment where Andis is right now. You've observed how the organization was maturing in their technology and coming up all the way to the AI. So right now, everybody talks about AI integration, and you guys, I know you have a full Microsoft Copilot deployment. So I'm curious, what kind of insight can you share with the listeners and the viewers about observing the growth of Andis from the point where you came into it and the point where it is right now? What had to happen in order for this transformation to be successful, for you to be able to be in the position where you can say, all right, we have this Microsoft Copilot deployment and it's going good. So what had to happen internally that can be generalized for the broader audience? So if somebody's listening to this and they don't know where should they focus on, that's going to be their map.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look back to where I started, I was fortunate to enter a company that wasn't, necessarily functionally broken from an IT point of view 13 years ago. We had an
Mm-hmm.
ERP system, we had pretty good systems and processes in place. And, it was a company that I walked into saying, we need to invest more into IT. And a really good focus in terms of how do we invest in IT is we need to make data driven decisions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so 13 years ago, we were saying we needed more data and we needed to make decisions based on information and data. And so I think that puts a good context in terms of where I started. We were on a legacy ERP system and really starting there, talking about, well, how do we structure the data? How do we use that system to drive business process? How do we make sure we have as much data in that system as possible so that we can bring it back together when we make a decision?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we were working on things like building out a really robust BI platform so that we could do the sales reporting we needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very, very much kind of a Kimball based design to an AI BI platform with facts and dimensions and all the goodness that goes around that technically.
Mm-hmm.
A few years into that, we made a decision to migrate off of our legacy system and make that transition to a cloud based platform
Mm-hmm.
and landed on Microsoft Dynamics as the one that we chose. And so, in a lot of ways, that ended up kind of defining a path for us once we finished our ERP conversion to what technology platforms made the most sense for our business to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But as we did our ERP deployment, we put a lot of effort into data cleansing, data cleanup, making sure our data was structured well. And so, taking the philosophy and continuing the philosophy of we need the data to do reporting. We need clean data to move the product processes forward.
Mm-hmm.
That really set a really good stage for us of having good, clean data. And once we completed our ERP conversion, AI didn't really exist in the way we know it today. It was, before OpenAI had their big product announces. And we started putting the effort into process automation, but a lot of process automation specifically around data governance.
Mm-hmm.
you know, you oftentimes can tell by the context of the data what's wrong about it.
Mm-hmm.
If an
Mm-hmm.
item has this attribute, you need to have this other attribute filled in, and started building process automation again within the Power Platform framework to notify people or automatically fill in information that was missing or likely incorrect. And again, having good data was at the heart of that idea so that we could get the reports that we wanted.
It was a very good bet for you to have a good data for the future as well with any AI,
Yeah, it was
with
a
any AI
good wise
deployment.
bet at that point, and then and also maintaining a solid structure around our BI platform so the data was well organized and rational to somebody who was an analyst, right?
Uh-huh.
Because it did have a good context around it within our BI platform that we could work with as we move forward.
It feels that going and kind of upgrading into Microsoft Copilot was almost inevitable for you guys. Can you walk me through how those decisions are usually made in organizations? Like what kind of internal conversations have been going internally? What kind of arguments are making the leadership team comfortable in committing to that level of the platform investment and upgrade to the Copilot?
Yeah, I think for us, because we had the underlying architecture of Microsoft products,
Hmm.
it makes the decision a little bit easier. We'd already made an investment in an ERP system. We already made an investment in a CRM system, both of which are on that platform. We
Hmm.
already have all of our data in the M365 platform with SharePoint and Outlook. And so, I think for an organization like ours, it became a very natural fit of saying, hey, we already invested all of these things and the vendor has capabilities available to us. And I think when you look at that being a starting point of a decision, that is a good starting point.
Hmm.
I do think that, you can look at, well, is Copilot the best AI platform or is it the best large language model? Maybe, maybe not. I think we've seen some really good improvements in the past few months with the incorporation of the Anthropic models, the rapid deployment of the OpenAI models. So from a technology point of view, yes, there's better on the market. I'll acknowledge that,
Hmm.
but there isn't necessarily a cohesion in all of those technologies. And I think that that's one of the areas where it's
Yeah,
important for an organization to understand, we'll put this into the context of everything else we do. And if I were an organization running Google Workspace, I might come to the conclusion that Gemini is a much more natural fit for me because it
yeah,
has all of
100%.
these other integration points that are already out there.
Hmm.
But I would say that I'm less interested in whether or not it's the best technology because my focus needs to be on how am I adding value to the business. And
Hmm.
and I don't really care if it's the best LLM. What I care about is can I get the result I need from the tools that I have available? Can I generate the automations that matter to the business to improve efficiency? And so, I would tell a business looking at these platforms, think about your outcomes you're trying to get. I need to run an efficient, cost effective business and put the effort into understanding how do I get from point A to point B with either the technologies I already have invested in, or if I have to make a radical shift, right? And that radical shift for us came when we made a choice to move from a legacy ERP system. We knew with our legacy ERP system, we weren't going to go from point A to point B. We needed to change the model. We needed to find a different platform. And I think we made that hard decision of spending a lot of money to change ERP systems. And
And then
that
going
was
back, it doesn't make sense.
and that was fundamentally based on a business need. It's
Hmm.
not getting us from point A to point B. It's not going to be the platform for our growth. It's going to continue to be our constraint.
Hmm.
And that's when we made that shift. So whether it's AI or any technology shift, it needs to be grounded in good business logic.
You also used to write, and you actually mentioned to this to me when we were chatting before we started recording the podcast about the difference of AI for me and AI for we. Can you talk more about that for the listeners and the viewers so they can understand the difference in the like it's you can kind of grasp the difference just from the naming of it, but can you explain the way that you're thinking about this difference and how are you thinking where are we right now?
Yeah, I mean, if I'll start with where are we right now and where am I within my organization right now? I think we're where most people are. I think AI has been very me centric
Hmm.
since its inception. And when I talk about being me centric, it's a tool for me to become more efficient. It's a tool for me to increase my ability to work efficiently and increase my output. Where I think a lot of the AI tools are starting to move, and I think we need to start to move, is how do we turn AI into a team advantage? Some of the biggest successes that we've seen from automation has been when we remove the AI from the human being the center of it to allowing automation to happen, which
Hmm.
is one step forward, and that's moving it from the me to the we. But the other part is, how do we take that organizational knowledge and how do we take the organizational learnings and allow those to be disseminated to more people, right?
Yeah.
It's the cross training of AI so that more people can use the information. And I think there's two facets of that. One is a technical piece of it. If I'm using a tool like Claude or I'm using a tool like Codex, how do I share the knowledge and the skills that I'm putting into my tool so that other people
Hmm.
can have that same knowledge and skill?
Yeah, because then it's just in the loop. It's in your loop and it's not in
Right.
the loop of the organization.
Yeah, and then I think there's the cultural piece of that around continuing data cleansing so that we're taking that tribal knowledge that each individual may have and then disseminating that tribal knowledge to the organization. So I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
I think again where we are on the spectrum today is still a very much me centric approach, and I think that you know organizations and people are really going to be they're going to see a big shift when it becomes less of an individual centric model.
Hmm.
And I do think you see that if you watch the podcasts around AI, a lot of it is talking about how do I create this one person company with AI. Well, that's great. I
You hear
love that.
all the time about personal assistants, but I almost never heard about the team assistant. Like that's the where the difference lives. Yeah.
Right. And I think some of those landmarks for us were, responding to consumer support emails in a meaningful way. That's an AI for we. That's taking workload off of a team and providing value for a group rather than it being value for an individual.
I want to ask a question that's adjacent to what you just said. You also wrote about this, that the institutional knowledge that a human has, it's a huge asset. It's very fragile because the moment when a person that has been in their position for, let's say, 15 years, 10 years, they have 10 years of context. The moment when that person leaves the company, all those 10 years of context, they live with them. And you can't really translate the context from someone's head into the LLM yet, or there are ways. There are a lot of companies are trying to do that themselves. They try to either build something that they own, or they try to buy somebody from the market. It's different approaches trying to get this basic knowledge, get this context from people's heads into LLM. I'm curious, what's your approach to solving this problem at Andis? Maybe you can talk more about the points where this problem is the most visible in terms of AI. So the people that are listening and that are viewing, they can better understand the problem and they can better understand where this problem is being present in your cases. So maybe they can reference it for their own day to day.
Sure. I think that realistically that's the big problem I'm trying to solve right now, right? I think curating the knowledge and making sure that there's an understanding of what good sources of knowledge is. is
Mm-hmm.
important in the organization. Going back to the AI for me, one of the things that I end up doing with when I'm using AI is I try to understand, why did AI make the wrong decision when it made one? Why did it give
Mm-hmm.
me bad information? What was
Mm-hmm.
its source? And then how do I correct it? And so if I'm working with tools that include things like skills, it's creating this continual learning loop that for me remains fairly prompted in terms of how do we improve.
Mm-hmm.
um, as I look at the opportunities that I'm trying to solve now, it's looking at, when AI didn't do a good job, how do I improve the knowledge sources and processes so that it can do a better job? I think that one of the great things that we are seeing with AI is using AI to then improve the knowledge source, right? It's being
Mm-hmm.
able to build the sources of knowledge that are curated and good so that the future work will continue to be better. But it's still it is truly a curated step. It takes somebody knowing they ought to do that today in order to truly do that. And so I think we're at a point where we have to put a little bit more effort into that as an organization, in terms of, let's curate out the bad information.
Mm-hmm.
Let's structure our data in a way that becomes much more visible and obvious that it's the good information. um, and I think that's really an important step that we're all going to have to go through at some point, in terms of building the organizational brain so that it stays within the organization. And the tribal knowledge, I think there's always going to be a little bit of that, but it's also starting to create that culture around, because it's easier to create documentation, creating the documentation in a much more structured way, that tribal knowledge doesn't always leave. It becomes much more clear, the meaning of a question that's getting asked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Curious, have you ever encountered any resistance with that kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's never an easy path, right? Oftentimes, we're dealing in traditional change management of teaching an individual, why is it good for them, right? What's in it
Mm-hmm.
for me is a really important question that has to be answered anytime you're doing an organizational change.
Yeah.
And we've gone through that as we did things like ERP system implementations. And part of the approach I like to take is understanding where to push back on resistance versus understanding when to allow the resistance to occur, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's usually an easier path that you can work your way down that isn't going to be as challenging and isn't going to create
It's kind of
the.
like in Aikido, when instead of blocking the push, you can just step away from the kick.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Just let the resistance happen when it's going to be hard, and let's go focus on something else. We can always add value somewhere. And, if you have things that are in the way, let's go work on something else for a little while. And maybe what you've done and the success that you've had on another front becomes a opportunity to break down the resistance where you're running into the challenges.
And what you just said about when AI makes a bad decision or makes a mistake, then you go and you try to reverse engineer to understand what brought to that decision. I'm curious if you can remember an thing that surprised you, something that you thought that, well, that's definitely okay, that shouldn't be broken. And then you found out that the flaw was in the thing that you would never suspect that that's going to be the thing. I'm curious if you can remember anything that was interesting and unexpected for you.
There's probably not one thing that I can think of that's a great example, because I say to people every single day I work with AI, or I'll say I play with AI, because it is a bit of a toy for me. Every day I play with AI, I'm both in awe of how incredible it is, and then I'm also in awe of how incredibly dumb it can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
it could be something as simple as I have an agent for identifying what general ledger account I should approve a invoice for, and it gets things wrong frequently enough. And I have a knowledge source. It's like, well, it should be pretty clear from that knowledge source that it shouldn't have given me that bad answer. Um, and my answer at this point is, okay, well, I go back and I ask it, well, why did you give me that answer rather than this other answer I know is correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I have it improved. It's not perfect yet, right?
It's
And
like with a kid.
it's a continual evolution. And I think we've all heard the idea of, well, AI is like an intern. AI is an intern that has PhD level knowledge, but they maybe don't have the street smarts, right?
Yeah.
And so they're incredibly brilliant and can do the math, or they can't because it's AI. But but they just don't understand the context of your business because they haven't worked in your business.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't have that context that you have been collecting over 13 years, lives in your brain, in your memory. They just don't have access to it. Like if they would, then maybe they would be able to do something. Like maybe they would be able to make less mistakes because humans, they, at the end of the day, they also make mistakes. And then the thing is they make the mistake, they learn from it and they improve themselves. And the next time when they do it, there is a lesser chance that they're going to do it.
Well, the other thing I would add to that is I also tend to ask, what did I do wrong when AI got it
Hmm.
wrong? Right.
Hmm.
Because I do think that there's a reality that, I need to learn how to ask the question differently or better. I need to learn how to delegate differently and better. I think there's an unnatural piece of work that exists for all of us today of getting better at delegating to AI, which is again like delegating to an intern with limited experience. I probably have to get better at describing the outcome I'm trying to get, and in some cases, how to get to that path than
Hmm.
I was able to do or did the first time. And so when AI gets it wrong, it's possibly as much my fault as it is the model's fault that it got it wrong.
Yeah. Like the way that it was set up. If you look back at your career at Andis, what do you think was an obvious lesson for that you learned that isn't being discussed publicly? That if you knew that thing earlier, that would save you so much time. So like if you were in a situation where you're looking at yourself 13 years ago when you're just like your first year at Andis, what would you say to yourself that would save you time, energy, resources? What would be your advice to yourself?
I think when I talk about change management and
Mm,
understanding when and where to push, that's probably one of the lessons I've learned in my career. I can think about myself early career and early days, and I would be hard charging. I might be willing to fight certain battles. I think that recognizing when it's time to step back and let somebody else step forward is really important. When we did our ERP implementation, a lot of companies make that an IT project.
mhm.
And one of the decisions that we made as an organization that I think was one of the best decisions we could have made was we made sure that the executive was not an IT person. We made sure that the executive sponsor was somebody else in the executive team so that we had clarity that this is a business project. This is not an
Yeah, yeah,
IT
yeah, yeah,
project.
yeah.
And so I think that again, if you think about it in a larger context of knowing when to push, knowing when to partner, knowing when to ask for help, those are all really important things. And then having the ability to reflect on what went right and what went wrong.
Mhm.
Again, early career, trying to work through problems and thinking about how somebody else may have done something differently. Always having the ability to self-reflect and think, how could you have done something differently? Whether it's a big project or whether it's thinking about AI. How did I ask the question wrong that it got it wrong? It wasn't necessarily ChatGPT's fault. It was how I prompted it, right? So being able to be self-reflective is really important.
So now it's easier to do it because now you can have a committee of AI agents, each one taking a different stance. One is going to be your critic, one is going to be your fan, one is going to be, I don't know, super smart person, and another is going to be emotionally well fit person, agent. And you can have those working together, where you're analyzing your steps, analyzing your decisions, giving you different perspectives. Because the thing that I've seen that we often get locked in our own way, the way that we see things, and we don't understand how limited it is, because for us it's the whole world, but for others it may be like a small portion. So just broadening your perspective, understanding will set the people up on the success to implement what you just said. And I'm also curious to flip this question a bit another way. So what would you recommend to a peer of yourself that is in a similar company at a similar stage as you are in right now, and they're thinking about AI deployment and they want to make ROI. They don't just want to make AI for the sake of making AI. They want to make AI to achieve business impact. Command to them to do. What's like the one single piece of advice that you think is crucial and vital for being successful with that goal?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that is really important is actually thinking about it in terms of how do I go from something that's not going to be proof of concept to production is
Hmm.
actually figuring out what a reasonable goal is going to be. our biggest successes haven't been huge projects. Our biggest successes have been individual, very pointed solutions to problems. We didn't go to try to create a AI based email response bot to solve for every single problem.
Mm-hmm.
We started with an AI response bot that could answer one problem perfectly, one question perfectly every single time,
Mm-hmm.
and exactly one question perfectly every single time. And that question happened to be 25% of my email volume.
Mm-hmm.
And so, doing a little bit of the analysis, say, what are you doing really frequently and isn't really hard is a good place to start, because you will have stacking wins. You'll get to, these were the easy things that I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And have an impact right now to save people's time, to save labor, and then free us up with those stacking wins. The other areas is realize that the technology is changing very rapidly.
Yeah.
And what you solved last year, you may come back and refactor again this year.
Mm-hmm.
Another area of a big win is doing AI order entry. We have about 10% of our order volume that comes in via email and it goes from email to warehouse without human intervention,
Mm-hmm.
because we're reading orders coming in with AI. And the technology has evolved in such a way that, instead of going through a training process, we'll be deploying an updated model that should become a lot more efficient and will likely end up doubling our ability to handle the edge cases that existed. But we didn't wait for perfect. We said, hey, we know we can solve this problem right now, and it's meaningful. 10% of your order lines coming in and not having human intervention is a big labor win, and
It
it
is. Yeah.
freed up resources to do other things. The other thing in terms of thinking about ROI, and I encourage this because oftentimes we want to go to, and you hear the news stories, this is how many heads were cut because of AI. Don't think of it from that point of view. Part of what we're doing is thinking about, there is a lot of valuable work that we don't have time to do today. There's new things we could be doing that we can't do today. And so we've actually expanded the work that's happening in the areas I'm responsible for. We've been able to transition manual effort from other departments into my department because we've been able to create some capacity to handle that manual work. And it's work that had to be done, and it was work that we could not yet automate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that those are the things that are really important in terms of how do you first look for things that will create an ROI. It may not be big dollars right away, but you're stacking the wins and you're learning. And then it may also be that you're transitioning the work so you can do something higher value.
I 100% agree with you. It's like always the question of divide and conquer, and then it's how can we make sure that, let's say, our employees that where their cost for hour is huge, that they don't spend them doing low value tasks. How do we make sure that that their time is being spent solving interesting, complex, high value problems rather than just doing something super simple? And I think that's a perfect example of what people should be doing. Thank you so much for the insights, for the conversation. I mean, it's been great. So you want to add something in the end?
I think for companies that are looking at technology and AI, we're at a really exciting time in terms of both of those. But I think that it's really important to ground the decisions on business outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get so wrapped up in what the cool technology is as an IT person. I love technology. I play with technology. It's fun for me. It's the puzzle that I have a passion for, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, most of us aren't technology companies. Most of us are running a business with an outcome that is serving customers and making profit. And so focus on those and let the technology follow.
Can viewers, listeners get in touch with you if they want?
Connect with me on LinkedIn is probably the best way. Mark Rohde is my name, and I'm certainly available there.
Perfect. I'm going to leave the link to your LinkedIn in the show notes, and we're also going to announce it on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your time, Mark, today. It's been great. I enjoyed every moment of the conversation, and I would love to do a second shot sooner or later.
Thank you, Nick.